Evelyn rushed home after signing her divorce papers with a man she loved. Half her life. The pen had barely lifted from the page when she felt the weight of finality settle across her shoulders. No dramatic goodbye, no tears, just two signatures and silence. She hadn't cried. Not yet. The numbness was too deep, the disbelief too solid. The sky outside the courthouse was overcast, and a mild drizzle misted the windshield as she drove, blurring the world just enough to make it feel dreamlike. Everything had happened so quickly. Last month she had still been a wife. Now she was what? Free? Alone? Renfield Lane was tucked away in a modest neighborhood 20 minutes outside of the city. The street was so quiet. Evelyn could hear the tick of her car's cooling engine after she parked. Her new home stood at the far end of the cul-de-sac, a two-story Victorian-style house with olive green shutters and a narrow wraparound porch. The kind of house people called charming or full of character, though some might whisper too much work under their breath. It had been priced suspiciously low, which Evelyn attributed to its age and the seller's urgency. She didn't ask too many questions. She hadn't wanted think too much. She needed to leave her old life behind, in this house, a place where no memory of Peter lingered, was the perfect escape. She stepped out of her car, the wet pavement dark beneath her boots, and fumbled with her keys. As she turned the lock and pushed the heavy front door open, a faint smell greeted her, not mold exactly, more like dampness that had soaked into old wood. She paused, listening. The house held its breath. Home, she said aloud, trying the word on like a borrowed coat. The living room was spacious, with tall ceilings and ornate crown molding that curled like ivy across the edges. A massive fireplace dominated the far wall, flanked by bookshelves that still held a few forgotten hardcovers. She ran her fingers along the spines, catching dust under her nails. Boxes filled most of the space. She had only brought essentials: clothes, books, kitchenware, and a few framed photos she wasn't sure she even wanted anymore. The silence in the house was different from the quiet of the cul-de-sac. It was denser, somehow, not oppressive, but weighty, as if the walls were listening. Evelyn spent the rest of the day unpacking. She worked in a steady rhythm, grateful for the distraction. Evening crept in almost unnoticed, the gray light shifting through the lace curtains she hadn't yet replaced. As she set a kettle on the stove, she noticed a dark smudge on the tile just beside the refrigerator. Kneeling down, she rubbed at it with a paper towel, expecting coffee or dirt, but the stain didn't lift. It wasn't sticky or wet. It just seemed embedded, as though it had been there for years. She frowned but didn't dwell. That night she curled up on the couch with tea and a book she didn't read. Her eyes kept drifting to the windows. There was nothing outside but shadowed trees and the occasional flicker of a neighbor's porch light. She thought about texting Peter, for no reason, just to say something mundane, to pretend that the world still made sense. But she didn't. At some point she dozed off. A creak woke her. She sat up sharply, the teacup tilting and spilling cold liquid onto her lap. She looked toward the staircase. Nothing moved. The house was old. Old houses creaked. Still she stood and walked slowly through the main floor, turning on lights as she passed through each room. She even checked the basement door, which remained stubbornly locked. The real estate agent had said it was for storage and currently under renovation. The contractor's key would be mailed separately. That night she slept in the guest bedroom. Her bed hadn't been assembled yet. The guest room was painted a soft, washed-out blue. It felt more sterile than cozy, but at least it was quiet. In the dark, Evelyn stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional groan of the house settling. But then there was a sound, a whisper of movement, not from outside but from the room adjacent. The master bedroom. She held her breath, listened. Nothing. Maybe a draft had nudged something loose. Maybe she was still in the mode of living with Peter, subconsciously waiting to hear him brushing his teeth or dropping a shirt on the floor. Her breath eventually slowed. Sleep came reluctantly. The next morning was gray again, the kind of sky that made time feel unmoored. She made coffee, still bothered by the sound she'd heard. With her mug in hand, She climbed the stairs and opened the door to the master bedroom. Everything was just as she'd left it. Unpacked boxes, a bare mattress, the window cracked slightly for air, but on the floor near the far wall, a photo frame had fallen from one of the boxes. Face down, she picked it up. It was a picture of her and Peter, standing on a pier in Venice, both laughing. She hadn't remembered packing that one. She set it back inside the box, face down again. That afternoon, Evelyn tried to shake the growing feeling that something was slightly off. The rooms felt colder than they should, even with the heat on. Her phone's battery kept draining unusually fast, and the lights in the hallway would flicker. Not all the time, but just enough to notice. Still, she told herself it was nothing. A mix of stress, a new environment, and maybe even grief she hadn't yet processed. That evening, she decided to walk down the street and meet a neighbor. A woman with a shaggy dog was outside, tending to her small garden. Evelyn introduced herself. "Oh, you're the one who bought the Walsh place," the woman said. "Brave." Evelyn blinked. "Brave." The woman hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Just that it's such an old house. Lots of creaks and quirks. Hope you're settling in okay." Evelyn nodded slowly, but as she walked back up the path to her front porch, she swore for just a second she saw someone watching her from the upstairs window. She turned quickly. No one there, just curtain lace fluttering in the breeze. Evelyn stood at the foot of the porch steps, her breath catching in her throat. The upstairs window, the one above the master bedroom, hung still now. No figure, no movement, just gauzy curtains swaying gently, as though stirred by the draft from the cracked window she'd opened earlier. Still, she could have sworn. She climbed the steps slowly, key in hand, turning once to glance back at the street. The neighbor with the dog had gone inside. The world felt oddly distant, as if she were moving inside a snow globe sealed off from real time. Back inside, the house welcomed her with the usual chill. She rubbed her arms and clicked the door shut behind her. The lock stuck slightly, resisting her at first before giving with a soft, reluctant click. She walked upstairs, half-hearted attempt to reassure herself. Maybe the curtain had simply caught the light in a strange way. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. She told herself that over and over again as she entered the master bedroom and flicked on the overhead light. Empty. Boxes. Mattress. Faint smell of plaster and dust. Her eyes flicked to the window, still ajar. The curtain moving faintly. She crossed to it and pulled it closed. The breeze stopped, but something still felt disturbed, like the air had shifted after someone left the room. She stepped closer to the window, looking out. From this height she could see the neighbor's house, a few parked cars and the narrow sliver of woods beyond Renfield Lane. But directly below the window was something odd, two faint indentations in the soft earth, as though someone had stood there for a long time, just watching. They backed away and shut the window. The night passed slowly. Evelyn stayed up too late, scrolling her phone, trying to ignore the sounds, small creaks, faint pops of settling wood, a distant rattling pipe, ordinary things, she told herself, but her mind wouldn't settle. Thoughts kept circling back to the neighbor's words, brave, and the way she'd smiled like she was hiding something, and the way the upstairs had felt, just a bit too cold. On impulse, Evelyn searched her new address online. Nothing immediately alarming came up. Property sales history, old photos from a previous listing, a link to a gardening blog that had featured the house once in a charming local finds post. She scrolled further, hoping for distraction. But then a thread buried in an old forum. Renfield Lane. Does anyone remember the house with the boarded basement? She clicked. The post was several years old, a short paragraph, with only one response. The one at the end of the street. Weird energy. I went in there once during an open house. Thought I heard whispering. Gave me the chills. That was all. Evelyn closed her laptop, jaw tight. Stupid internet. She wasn't going to spook herself over a throwaway comment. The next morning, she went back down to the kitchen, determined to start the day fresh. She had a list of errands to tackle, a few job interviews lined up over the next week, and plenty of unpacking to distract her. The sun had finally emerged, casting soft golden light across the floorboards. She started her coffee, opened the fridge for cream, and froze. The black smudge beside the fridge had grown. It stretched now, curling faintly across the grout between the tiles. She crouched down and ran her fingers over it. It was still dry, still perfectly integrated with the tile. Not mold, not dirt, just there, a part of the house. And as she touched it, her skin prickled, like something on the other side of the wall exhaled. She jerked her hand back, rising too quickly and bumping her head on the countertop. Cursing softly, she grabbed a rag and tried to scrub it again, furious now, but it remained, dark and stubborn. She dropped the rag and backed away slowly. She left the house after that, spent most of the day in cafes and thrift stores, buying things she didn't need. She even went to the library and browsed for hours, never settling on a book. It wasn't about needing anything. It was about not going back yet. When she returned home in the late afternoon, a small package was waiting on her porch. The contractor's key. She held it in her hand, heavy and cold. The basement. Inside, the house felt even quieter than before. She didn't go straight to the basement door. Instead, she wandered upstairs again, pretending to be tired, pretending to look for her phone charger. But as she passed the master bedroom door, she noticed something different. The photo, the one of her and Peter that had fallen yesterday, it was no longer in the box. It was on the floor again, face up. She hadn't moved it. This time, she picked it up slowly and stared at it. Her smile looked strained. Peter's arm around her shoulders seemed too tight. Something about their posture felt off, as though the moment had been captured just before something broke. She turned the frame over. Scratched lightly into the back of the wood was a single word: stay. Evelyn's fingers trembled. She looked around the room, heart thudding. She hadn't unpacked a knife yet. She was alone. It could be a coincidence. The frame was old. It might have had writing on it before. Maybe from the previous owner. Maybe from her stomach flipped. She needed to leave the room. She went downstairs, walking quickly, every step echoing in the hollow silence of the house. She stopped in front of the basement door, key in hand. Her palm was sweaty, but she pushed the key into the lock. It turned with a metallic click. The door swung inward with a low grunt. Darkness beyond. Unlit stairs descended into what looked like a carved-out void. A stale, earthy smell drifted up. She flicked the light switch. Nothing. Of course. She should have expected that. She stood there staring into the basement for several long moments. Then, not ready, she closed the door again. That night, Evelyn slept with the hallway light on. Just before she drifted off, she thought she heard something, a single creak, from downstairs. Evelyn didn't sleep deeply. Her dreams were shallow and strange. Whispers of sound without source. Rooms that stretched too long. Doors that opened to nothing but mirrors. Each time she began to drift fully under, some distant sound reeled her back up. A creak, the groan of floorboards, a soft clink like glass, brushing glass. She told herself it was the house settling. But that word settling was starting to sound dishonest. She woke sometime around 4. The sky outside still cloaked in pre-dawn gray. The hallway light buzzed gently outside her bedroom door. Evelyn sat up, rubbing her eyes, her mouth dry. She reached for the glass of water on her nightstand, but it was empty. She hesitated, then stood. The hallway was empty. She patted down the stairs, careful not to let the boards creak beneath her feet, though some did anyway. Long, complaining sounds that seemed louder than they should have been. The kitchen felt colder than the rest of the house. She poured a glass from the tap and leaned on the counter, trying not to look at the mark by the fridge. But her eyes were drawn to it all the same. It had changed again. Not larger, but different. Before it had been a smear, almost like a stain. Now, it had faint edges, sharper, like the outline of something spreading under the surface. She turned away, heart quickening, and drank deeply. The water tasted metallic. She grimaced and poured it down the sink, refilled from a bottle in her pantry, then returned to bed. She left the hallway light on again. By morning, Evelyn had convinced herself she'd imagined the change. The early morning haze played tricks on her, and she had been tired. That was all, just fatigue. Still, she found herself avoiding the kitchen longer than usual. She had planned to unpack more today, maybe finally put the guest room in order or set up her workspace. She was technically freelancing now, a few writing contracts, some editing jobs. But the house had a way of making her feel like anything beyond survival was a bit too ambitious. The light in the living room kept flickering, not constant, just a single flash, every few hours, bright enough to catch the eye, not enough to be fixed. Evelyn called the electrician the realtor had recommended, but the line went straight to voicemail. She left a message. Later that afternoon, she heard footsteps on the porch. She rushed to the door, half hoping it was a neighbor or maybe even the contractor with another package. No one was there, just the creak of the porch boards settling. Again with that word, she looked down, footprint muddy, from a single pair of boots, trailing across the welcome mat, and then ending abruptly, like whoever had been standing there had simply vanished. Her breath fogged in the air. The temperature had dropped again and she hadn't noticed. Evelyn spent the rest of the day upstairs, folding laundry she didn't care about, moving items from one drawer to another, pretending to clean every now and then. She'd think about the basement door, think about the way the air changed when she opened it, how still everything became, like the house itself was pausing. By evening she hadn't eaten, her appetite was absent lately. She blamed the stress. She sat on the couch and stared at the fireplace. Something in her wanted to light it, to drive out the cold and give herself the illusion of comfort. But something else, something quieter, resisted. She didn't know why. Eventually she went to the bookshelf. The books the previous owner had left were still there. She hadn't looked at them closely, hadn't cared. But now her fingers wandered over the spines, searching. Most were ordinary. History, cookbooks, dusty novels with cracked covers. But one stood out, a slim, cloth-bound book with no title on the spine. She pulled it out and opened it. No title page, just handwritten notes. The pages were lined but filled with tight, narrow script, neat, obsessive. She flipped to the middle and read, "The noises don't stop when I close the doors. It waits until I forget. Then it speaks again, only through the walls." She stopped, skin crawling. Another line, "If I stay too long in the same room, the floor hums. It's trying to think. It doesn't want me to know what it remembers." Evelyn slammed the book shut. She didn't put it back. She took it with her upstairs, locking it in the drawer of her nightstand. She didn't want it in the living room anymore. Didn't want it near the fireplace. She thought about calling someone. Anyone. But who? Peter was gone, and even if he wasn't, what could she say? That a house was thinking. No. She couldn't afford to be the woman who unraveled this early. She'd fought for this house, this freedom. So she poured another glass of wine, and told herself she was tired, told herself the book was fiction. Old, weird fiction. When she finally went to bed, she left her bedroom door open. She needed to hear the hallway. And around 3 in the morning she did. Not a creak, not a hum, but something softer. A whisper. Close, too close. She sat up in bed, heart stammering. No one in the room, no shape in the doorway. But her ears burned from the echo. She hadn't imagined it. The word had been clear, stay, just like the back of the photo frame. She stood slowly, barefoot on the cold floor, and stepped into the hallway. The nightlight buzzed softly, illuminating the narrow corridor. But now there was something else, a faint sound from below, not footsteps, scraping, like wood dragged against wood. The basement. The door she'd locked, except she hadn't. Not tonight. The scraping stopped. Evelyn didn't move for a long time. She backed slowly into her room and closed the door. Didn't lock it. Couldn't. The house was listening. The following morning arrived colorless. A milky haze drifted outside Evelyn's windows, muting everything beyond the yard. No birdsong, no wind, just fog, creeping in from the woods, like it had purpose. She sat at the edge of her bed, still in her nightclothes, her hands cradling a mug of tea gone lukewarm. Her mind hadn't rested, not after the whisper, not after the dragging sound from below. It hadn't come again. But she'd stayed awake, rigid, listening to every sigh of the house. The silence now felt more intrusive than the noises. She finally dressed, wrapping herself in a thick sweater, and padded downstairs. Her foot hovered at the last step. As her eyes landed on the basement door, it was open. Just a sliver, as though someone had eased it ajar and paused, deciding whether to enter or leave. Evelyn stared. She remembered shutting it. She was almost sure. but the past few nights had drained her sense of certainty. She crossed the floor slowly, resisting the urge to look toward the fridge and the mark beside it. She didn't need to. She could feel it, like it had awareness now, a subtle pulse she couldn't prove but could no longer ignore. The basement door stood waiting. She reached for it and pushed it gently shut, her fingers brushing the cool brass knob. She didn't lock it. Somehow that felt worse, like admitting it needed to be kept out. Instead, she turned and went about her routine. Breakfast she barely touched. A shower she didn't finish. By 10, she was pacing the living room, pretending to scroll her phone, while her eyes kept drifting to the book she'd locked away in the nightstand. Finally, she gave in. Back upstairs, she retrieved the cloth-bound journal and brought it down to the kitchen table. She opened it cautiously, skipping the pages she'd already seen. Further in, the writing changed. The letters became looser, the words more fragmented. The thing in the dark knows my voice. It mimics when I sleep. A later entry written shakily. I thought I was imagining it, but the house writes back. It leaves words in the dust. I wiped it away, but they returned. Different each time. Always knowing. Evelyn blinked at the page. Her chest tightened. She looked around the room. Her eyes settled on the nearby windowsill. Thin streaks of dust lined the edge, disturbed only by her fingers when she'd cleaned. But now, one clear line cut through the dust, like a single finger had been dragged through. And at the very end, at the far edge of the sill, 3 short lines, almost vertical. No shape, no letter, just marks. She reached for a tissue and wiped it away, shivering. That afternoon, she left the house again. This time she didn't wander. She drove to the local records office. She hadn't planned to, but the drive passed in a blink, her knuckles white on the wheel, her mind replaying the sound from the night before. Inside the records office, she waited in line, then approached the counter with practiced politeness. The man behind the glass looked up with a tired smile. "Can I help you?" "Yes," she said. "I just moved into 113 Renfield Lane. I'm wondering if you have the property records, or anything else. Historical incidents." "I guess." "Sure," he said, already typing. "Give me a moment." He tapped a few keys, then squinted at the screen. His smile faded. "Huh." Evelyn leaned forward. "What?" "There's not much," he said, frowning. "We've got transfer records. Sold 3 times in the past 15 years, but no notes on renovations, permits, complaints. It's weirdly thin. No police reports or emergency calls. Nothing like that." He shook his head. "Not in our system. Do you know who owned it before me?" He turned the screen slightly. "Mrs. Beryl Langdon. Sold to you 6 months ago. Before that, a man named Stephen Hall. And before that, no name, just marked as an estate acquisition." House sat empty for a while after that. She thanked him and left, more uneasy than before. She didn't return home right away. She parked at a small riverside cafe and sat in her car, looking at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She looked pale, old, like the past few days had aged her. Her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. "You should leave." That was all. She stared at the screen, her throat tightening. Her hands shook as she locked the phone and stuffed it into her coat. That evening she approached the basement door again. The air by it was different, slightly cooler, heavy, like a dense fog had gathered beneath the wood. She grasped the knob, turned it, opened it. Stale air drifted out. Still no light, just darkness, thick and silent. She stood there, unmoving, until something changed. From somewhere deep below, the faintest sound. Not a voice, not a whisper. A slow rhythmic tapping. 3 beats, then silence. 3 beats again, like a signal, or a code. She stepped back and shut the door. She didn't lock it. That night she dreamed of the hallway again. But this time, it wasn't empty. A figure stood at the end, just past the flickering nightlight. It was tall, its shape blurry. Evelyn couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It raised one arm and pointed down, toward the basement, toward the dark. She woke with a gasp, heart thundering in her chest. The nightlight was out, the hallway was dark, and the basement door was open. Again. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, her fingers trembling slightly as they gripped the banister. Her eyes stayed locked on the basement door, now open wide. Not just ajar like before. No movement, no sound, just the yawning, pitch-black descent. She didn't remember hearing it open. She had placed a dining chair against it before going to bed. Not heavy, just enough to notice if something tried to move it. But now the chair was in the middle of the hallway, neatly placed and upright, as if someone had moved it aside and done so with care. Not rushed, not forced thoughtfully. She backed slowly into her bedroom and shut the door. No lock, just wood, but it gave her a thin barrier, thin enough to pretend with. The rest of the night passed in fragments. Unrestful naps broken by shifts in temperature, brief moments of paralysis, where she swore she heard breathing outside her door. Nothing loud, nothing overt, just present. By dawn, Evelyn gave up on sleep. She sat on the edge of her bed, watching light slowly creep across the floor. Her limbs felt heavy, her mind buzzed with half-formed questions. What was this house? She turned toward the nightstand, where the journal still sat in the drawer. She didn't want to read it again, but she needed to. Downstairs, she brewed a pot of coffee and flipped open the journal at the kitchen table. This time, the handwriting had changed even more. It was erratic now, pressed hard into the paper, some letters almost carved through. I tried to leave. I packed a bag, stepped outside, but the trees moved. I saw them. It follows you, not just in the house, in your thoughts. It climbs inside. A page later, I burned part of the basement. Thought it might stop it, but it only got louder. The walls don't want it gone. Evelyn froze, rereading the passage again and again. She didn't remember hearing anything about a fire. The inspector's report had mentioned nothing. The basement looked untouched when she peeked inside the first week. Just empty space, with old shelves and a furnace that hadn't been updated since the 70s. Unless there had been repairs after. She stood and grabbed her phone. Another call to the realtor. Another voicemail. Hi, it's Evelyn. I need to talk about the house. There's something wrong here. I need to know what happened before I bought it. Please, call me back. She hung up and placed the phone on the table. It buzzed instantly. Unknown number again. This time a single word. Her fingers tightened around the phone, the skin on her arms prickling. She left the kitchen. Every room in the house suddenly felt off balance, tilted slightly toward the center, like gravity wasn't working quite right anymore. She wandered into the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing her temples. The fog outside had returned, thicker now. She could barely see the end of her driveway. It wasn't just in the mornings anymore. It lingered. Her thoughts drifted to the basement again. Her pulse sped up. She stood and crossed the hall to the linen closet, pulled out a flashlight. A real one this time, not her phone. She needed more than that. She returned to the basement door. It was closed again. She hadn't shut it. The chair was back in front of it, just like she'd placed it last night. Her breath caught. Her knees threatened to buckle. She switched on the flashlight. The beam cut across the door frame, steady and bright. One deep breath. Then she opened the door. The stairs creaked beneath her weight as she descended. Each step, a negotiation with fear. The air was cool and dry, but not still. It moved in slow currents, like something exhaling from deeper within. The beam of her flashlight swept across the basement. Cement floor, exposed beams, a metal furnace in the corner, and something else. On the far wall, barely visible, the shape of a door, smaller than normal, covered in flaking white paint. She stepped closer. The concrete floor felt oddly warm beneath her bare feet. The door wasn't locked. No handle, just a recess where a grip should have been. She hesitated, then pressed her palm to it. It moved easily, too easily, opening with a soft creak. Beyond it was a narrow crawl space, maybe 3 feet high. The flashlight showed dirt walls and old pipes running overhead. And something more, marks carved into the dirt, symbols like the ones in the journal. Evelyn ducked lower and crawled forward, knees crunching on gravel. The air smelled wrong, earthy, but with something faintly metallic. Old blood maybe. She reached the far wall. More carvings. Some of them looked fresh. Lines crisscrossed and circled, like someone had spent hours, days, etching them into the packed earth. She turned the flashlight back toward the entrance and froze. There, just outside the small doorway she'd crawled through, something shifted in the dark. She couldn't see a body, just movement. Slow, intentional. Her flashlight flickered. She clutched it tighter. "Hello?" she said, her voice hoarse and dry. The movement stopped. The beam flicked back on fully. Nothing there. She scrambled backward, hitting her shoulder on a low pipe as she emerged from the crawl space. Her breath came in ragged bursts, dust clogging her throat. Back in the basement, she slammed the crawl space door shut. It didn't feel like it mattered. That night she didn't sleep in her bedroom. She curled up on the couch with every light on and the flashlight clutched in her hand. At 2:47 a.m., she woke with a start, not from a noise, from a smell. Smoke. She bolted upright. The fireplace was lit. She hadn't touched it in days. Inside the flames, something blackened and curled. A photo. Charred, but she could still see the outline. A face. Her own. Burning. Evelyn recoiled, her pulse thundering in her ears. The photo, her face twisted and shriveled within the flames. She stood frozen, staring at the burning remnants, unable to move. But then, just as quickly as the fire had sparked, it flickered out. The room returned to its cold, empty stillness. No smoke, no crackle of heat. Just the charred remains of what had once been a photo. Her photo. She lunged forward, grabbing the poker by the fireplace, her hands trembling violently. She prodded the ashes, scattering them, hoping for some sign, some explanation. But there was nothing left. Nothing but soot and burnt fragments of paper. Her throat tightened and she had to force herself to breathe. Her hands shook as she wiped them down her jeans, trying to rid herself of the phantom heat still clinging to her skin. The photo wasn't there anymore, but the image of her own face, distorted and ruined in the fire, kept replaying in her mind. She staggered back from the fireplace, her legs unsteady beneath her. She needed to get out of the house. She needed space, fresh air. But when she turned toward the door, her eyes caught the kitchen again. A familiar heaviness hung in the air. The mark by the fridge, she hadn't noticed it at first. But now it felt like the focal point of the house. It pulled at her, demanding attention, a quiet force too constant to ignore. Evelyn moved toward it, her feet slow and deliberate. The mark was larger now, longer, twisting like something reaching upward. Her breath caught in her throat. It was as if the house was shifting again, altering its shape beneath her, responding to her presence. She crouched down close enough to touch it. Don't touch it. Her thoughts slammed into her with force. But she ignored them. Her fingertips hovered over the strange mark on the floor. Just as she was about to make contact, the doorbell rang. It was sharp, sudden, as if it had come from nowhere. Evelyn jumped back, stumbling toward the wall. Her heart thudded in her chest as she tried to steady herself. Who could it be? The last few days had blurred together, and she couldn't recall the last time someone had come by. She had barely left the house, and her phone calls had gone unanswered. She crept toward the front door, her hair scanning through the peephole. The fog outside had thickened, shrouding the world beyond in a damp, impenetrable gray. She couldn't see anything, just a smear of shadow and mist. She opened the door cautiously and found no one. Just a package. It lay there on the doorstep, plain and small, wrapped in brown paper, with no return address, just her name, written in spidery, elegant handwriting. Her hands shook as she bent down to pick it up. The paper felt cold against her fingers, too cold for something left outside. She turned it over, but there were no markings, no tape, no seams, just paper, as though it had been folded directly by hand. Something about it was wrong. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her, the eerie silence of the house pressing in on her. Her heart pounded as she peeled the paper away, her hands unsteady. Inside, nestled in soft, worn fabric, was another photo. It was the same one, the one she had seen in the fire. Her face, her eyes distorted by the flames. Only this time, it wasn't burning. It was alive. Evelyn felt her breath catch as she stared at the image, at her reflection on the photograph, trapped in the paper's glossy surface. She could almost hear her own voice coming from it, as if the image had something to say, something to scream, but no words formed. She could almost feel the heat radiating from the photo, a dark warmth that threatened to consume her. Her stomach turned, and then beneath the photograph, there was something else, a small folded piece of paper. With shaking hands, she unfolded. The words on the paper were written in the same spidery handwriting as the envelope. It knows, it always knows, and now it has you too. She sank to the floor, feeling a wave of nausea hit her. The air was too thick, too heavy. She could hear the walls closing in, the faint creak of the house's bones beneath her. For a moment, Evelyn's mind went blank. The house was pulling at her, pulling her toward. She could feel it in her bones, the dark pulse of it, the oppressive weight pressing her down. It wasn't just her imagination anymore. She had to leave. She had to leave now. But before she could rise, the front door slammed shut behind her, the sound like thunder. The air seemed to shift. The house was awake. Something was coming. Her heart raced in her chest, her breath quickening as she scrambled toward the door. She pulled on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged. The walls seemed to vibrate, and in the silence, she heard it, soft at first, then clear, the rhythmic tapping. 3 beats, then silence. 3 beats again. It was coming from downstairs, from the basement. She turned toward the stairway, her breath shallow. Then in the deep silence of the house, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. Close, right behind her. She spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing there. The house was breathing too. Evelyn's breath hitched as the air around her thickened, pressing against her chest. The breath she heard, it wasn't just in her head. It was real, steady, and it was coming from behind her, filling the room with a suffocating weight. She turned slowly, dreading the sight of what she might find. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the sound of breathing lingered, as if it had taken on a life of its own, echoing in the corners of her mind. She could hear it in her pulse, in the sound of her heartbeat, thumping louder with each passing second. The basement door stood open, far wider than before, a yawning mouth in the darkness, waiting for her to step inside. For a moment, she considered fleeing, running out of the house, leaving it all behind. But something deeper than her own fear, held her in place. A presence, an invisible weight, like invisible hands holding her down, binding her to the house. It was as if the house didn't want her to leave. And yet, every instinct in her screamed for her to go. She backed away slowly, unable to tear her eyes away from the stairs leading down. The air hummed with tension. She could feel the weight of the house, pressing closer, as though it was growing larger, swallowing everything around her. Each movement she made seemed to cause the house to shift, creak, and groan, as if responding to her anxiety. It knew. She took a step toward the front door. But again the sound of the rhythmic tapping filled the silence, louder this time. The 3 beats. Then silence. 3 more beats. She froze, her skin prickling. It was coming from below. It was calling her. With slow, measured steps, she made her way back to the basement door. Her hand reached for the railing, trembling as she descended the first step. The air grew colder, denser with each downward step. Her flashlight flickered in her grasp, but she kept moving, drawn toward the basement as if some invisible force was guiding her. And then, she heard it. A whisper, faint at first, but growing clearer. A voice, low and guttural, rasping with something that was more than just words. It didn't sound human. It was ancient, a sound from somewhere deep inside the earth itself. Come, closer. The flashlight in her hand flickered out completely, plunging her into darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in sharp, ragged gasps. Her legs felt heavy as if they were filled with cement. Every instinct told her to run, to flee from the house, from whatever this thing was. But the darkness held her in place. The whisper came again, now closer, unmistakable. You belong to me. Her throat tightened. She gasped for air, but it felt as though the very atmosphere had thickened around her, pressing in. She turned, instinctively running back toward the stairs. But something caught her wrist, cold, so cold. She spun around, but there was nothing there. The cold was everywhere now, creeping into her skin, making her blood feel thick and sluggish. Her vision blurred, and for a brief, terrifying moment, the walls of the basement seemed to shift. The room stretched and contracted as though it was alive, breathing in sync with her panic. She pulled against the invisible grip that held her wrist, her heart thumping so loudly she could barely hear anything else. The whisper became a rasping, choked sound, growing louder, more frantic. "It's too late. You're already here. You can't leave." Evelyn's legs gave way, and she fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the floor. The temperature dropped, the air growing dense and suffocating, as if she were drowning in the dark. Then suddenly there was a sharp sound, a door closing. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear, as the basement door swung shut, its wooden frame creaking against the pressure. It slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire house, and the silence returned, thick and oppressive. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The house had locked her in. The house had claimed her. Her fingers scraped at the floor as she crawled toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. She tried again, desperate, pulling with all her strength, but the door was as immovable as the walls themselves. There was no escape. Not now. A low laugh echoed in the darkness. The laughter was rich, deep, and full of malice. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a presence, filling every corner of the room, crawling under her skin. It was watching her. It had been waiting. Evelyn's breath hitched. She could hear footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching from the darkened end of the basement. But there was no one there. No form, just the sound of movement, as if the very space around her was closing in. Her mind raced. She had to do something. She couldn't let this thing claim her. Couldn't let the house take her like it had taken those before her. But it was too late for that. The walls were closing in, and her mind was unraveling with every second. The voice, the whispers, the tapping, they were all coming from inside her head now. She could feel the house inside her. Her thoughts were no longer her own. Her memories were blurring, twisting, mingling with the house's own history. Faces, names, sounds, all were merging into one long, suffocating nightmare. And the darkness, it was waiting, watching, hungry. "You are mine," the voice whispered again, close enough that Evelyn felt the words inside her skull, crawling into the deepest recesses of her mind. And then, silence. Evelyn's breath was ragged. Each inhale a battle against the tightening grip of the darkness. The house was pressing in, its walls and floor shifting beneath her. She could feel the weight of it. The years of isolation, a history it carried in its bones. It was not just a structure. It was a living thing, its very foundation made of something older, something darker. She pulled herself to her feet, her legs weak beneath her. Her fingers fumbled in the dark, searching for something to ground her, something that could help her make sense of the chaos around her. Her flashlight was still there, discarded on the floor, its beam faintly illuminating the cold stone wall. She grabbed it, hands trembling, and turned it on, the beam slicing through the blackness. And that's when she saw it. A figure. Not human, not quite. It stood at the far end of the basement, just beyond the reach of the flashlight's beam. The silhouette was too tall, too thin. It seemed to shimmer and shift, its edges not quite defined, like it was made of smoke or shadows. But there was a face she recognized. It was her own. The face was distorted, stretched in a grotesque imitation of her own features. The eyes, those wide, dark eyes, were wrong, hollow, empty, as if whatever this thing was had stolen her identity, her very essence, and twisted it into something monstrous. Her heart pounded in her chest as the figure took a step forward. The air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and the whispering began again. So close now it felt like it was coming from inside her skull. "Come closer, closer to the truth. It's already inside of you." Evelyn froze, her body betraying her mind as it screamed for her to run. But her legs wouldn't obey. Her gaze was locked on the figure, its movements slow and deliberate, each step echoing in the silence. It was moving toward her. No, not just moving. Drawing closer. The very space around her seemed to bend toward it, as if the house itself was complicit in this dark ritual. The figure raised one long, slender hand, its fingers tapering into claws, and pointed at her. You belong to me now. The words were not spoken. They pressed into her, vibrating in her chest, in her throat, in the deepest parts of her mind. She could feel them, physically, as if the very essence of the house was invading her thoughts, clawing its way through her consciousness. And then, the laughter came again. It wasn't the deep, malevolent sound from before. This was different. This was her voice, but it wasn't her. It was a hollow mockery of her own laughter, a twisted echo that rang through her bones, seeping into every part of her. She gasped, clutching her head as her vision blurred. The edges of the room seemed to warp, the walls bending inward like they were alive, watching her, waiting. The shadows seemed to stretch toward her, pulling her closer to the center of the room, to that thing standing at the end of the basement. The figure's face, her face shifted again. The expression was one of hunger, twisted and distorted as if it were savoring the fear radiating from her. The darkness around her thickened, and for a brief moment, she saw something else. A glimpse of what lay beyond the figure. A hallway, long and narrow, stretching out into an endless void. The hallway was covered in the same strange symbols she had seen earlier in the crawl space. Those marks that seemed to mean something, something older than language itself. They pulsed with a rhythmic energy, like the heartbeat of the house, beating in time with her own. "You are part of me," the figure whispered, its voice now a low, rasping hum that vibrated in her skull. "You can never leave. You belong to Renfield now." Evelyn's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed to the floor. Her hands scraped against the cold stone, the rough texture sending jolts of pain through her fingertips. She could feel the house, the walls pressing in on her, suffocating her. Every breath felt like it was being stolen from her, every thought consumed by the growing darkness that now seemed to be inside of her. Her fingers found the journal again. She hadn't realized she had dropped it when she had run for the door. It lay open on the floor in front of her, its pages fluttering as if being stirred by an unseen breeze. She reached for it, her hand trembling as she flipped through the pages, desperate for something, anything that could explain what was happening. The handwriting had changed again. It was no longer frantic, no longer desperate. It was calm, methodical. "I know it now. I know what it wants. The house isn't just a place. It is a vessel. It needs a soul, a part of the living. To thrive, it takes pieces of you. It twists you. It makes you part of it. And once you've crossed the threshold, once you've accepted its invitation, it never lets you go." She turned the page. The next passage sent a chill down her spine. "There is no escaping. There is no cure. It is already inside you." Evelyn's vision blurred again. As the words sank into her, she could hear the tapping again, the rhythmic sound, now echoing all around her, from behind her, from within her own chest, from the walls themselves. It was coming from everywhere. She could feel it now. It was inside her. The same cold weight, the same emptiness that had once lived in the house, was now living inside her. It was spreading through her, filling the empty spaces in her mind, seeping into her blood. And that laugh, her own laugh. "It's already too late." The words echoed in her mind, as she stared at the figure, her doppelganger standing there waiting. "Welcome home, Evelyn." Evelyn's pulse thrummed in her ears as she stared at the figure in front of her. The air around her was thick, suffocating, pressing down on her chest. Her body was trembling violently, not from cold, but from something deeper, something that coiled and writhed inside of her, as though it were part of the house itself. The figure, her twisted reflection, did not move. It simply stood there, its hollow eyes fixed on her, its presence drawing her in with an impossible weight. Evelyn could feel the pull, the longing. It was as if the house had wrapped itself around her heart, tightening its grip, urging her to step forward. But she couldn't. Her legs refused to move. She was frozen in place, the room spinning around her. The whispering was louder now, louder than the thundering of her heartbeat, louder than her own thought. The walls seemed to bend and stretch, and the shadows clung to the corners, their shapes forming faces, eyes, mouths, faces that she recognized. Her mind was unraveling. She slammed her hands over her ears, trying to block out the sound, But it wouldn't stop. It was inside her now, too, coursing through her blood, slipping into her thoughts. The house had taken root inside of her. It was consuming her from within. It's too late. The words came again, clearer this time, and Evelyn looked down. There, scrawled on the floor, were more of the strange symbols from the basement walls. They were glowing faintly now, an eerie greenish hue, pulsing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She stumbled back, her hands shaking. As she looked at the symbol, the room seemed to close in on her, the shadows stretching toward her, reaching out as if they wanted to pull her into them. The laughter came again, and this time it wasn't just the voice of the figure. It was her voice too. It came from everywhere. Come closer. Join us. You've always been ours. Evelyn tried to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. She could feel the air growing thicker, the darkness growing deeper. The very fabric of the house seemed to be alive, breathing in time with her. It was everywhere, in the walls, in the floors, in her own vein. Her mind was slipping. She could feel it. The house was inside her, taking over her thoughts, her memories. Every time she tried to remember something, anything from before, everything slipped through her fingers like smoke. It was all being erased, replaced by this thing, this presence that wanted nothing more than to consume her. She clutched the journal tighter, her hands slick with sweat, as she flipped through its pages once more. The writing was growing more frantic. The last few pages were barely legible. The ink smeared as though the writer had been shaking too hard to hold the pen steady. It's too late for me. The house will take what it wants. It always does. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes. You can't resist it. You can't escape it. The house will make you one of its own. The words seemed to claw at her, pulling her deeper into their grip. She could hear the tapping again, louder now, so loud it was like the very walls were vibrating with the sound. The house was alive. It was aware. It was watching her. A deep guttural sound filled the basement, and Evelyn's head snapped up. The figure was closer now, impossibly close, its elongated fingers outstretched toward her. Her heart skipped a beat. The room was spinning. She couldn't breathe. Come with me. The voice was a low growl, the words slithering into her ears, wrapping around her mind, squeezing until she thought her skull might crack. It was a compulsion, a command, and her body, against her will, started moving. Her feet carried her forward, slowly, one step at a time, as if some force was drawing her closer. The closer she got, the clearer the figure's features became. Her own face, contorted into a twisted mask, leered at her, its mouth stretched into a cruel, mocking grin. The eyes were empty, devoid of any humanity. They were hollow, like a void, a dark abyss that swallowed everything in its path. Her chest tightened with fear as the figure reached out, its cold fingers brushing against her arm. The chill of its touch sank deep into her skin, seeping into her very bones. She gasped, trying to pull away, but the grip was iron, unyielding. It's already begun. The words were not spoken aloud. They were in her head, in her heart, in the very air around her. They filled her with a dread so profound, she couldn't tell where she ended, and the house began. The darkness was overwhelming. It was suffocating her, consuming her from the inside out. And then, in that moment, Evelyn understood. This was what the house had always wanted. It wasn't just about taking her soul. It wasn't about breaking her mind. The house wanted to make her one of its own. It was going to pull her into itself, fold her into its history, its walls, its bones. She would become part of it, and once that happened, there would be no return, no escape. She could feel it. She was already changing. The shadows crept up her legs, winding around her body, curling into her skin. The house was inside her, and there was no turning back. She could feel her essence, her very self, unraveling in the darkness. The tapping came again, this time louder, faster, more frantic, as if something was trying to escape. Evelyn looked up and saw the door at the far end of the basement. The tapping was coming from there, as if something or someone was trapped in. It's too late, the figure whispered again, its voice now a low, hissing sound. You've already crossed the threshold. Her breath came in sharp gasps. As she stared at the door, there was no escape, but somewhere deep inside her, A flicker of defiance still burned. The door rattled again, the tapping growing louder. Evelyn, despite the overwhelming dread clawing at her, made her decision. She wasn't ready to give in. The air in the basement grew colder, and Evelyn could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on her, suffocating her with each passing second. The figure, her twisted reflection, loomed before her, its hollow eyes fixed on her every move. The darkness seemed to grow heavier with every breath she took, filling her lungs, creeping into her mind, slowly strangling her thoughts. But despite the overwhelming sense of dread, Evelyn could feel the defiance inside her, a faint flicker of something that refused to be consumed. She wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. The door at the far end of the basement rattled again, the tapping more frantic this time, like something or someone was desperate to get out. Evelyn's eyes snapped to it. The sound was coming from behind that door, the same door that had been locked and untouched for as long as she could remember. For a moment she hesitated. The house, the thing that had taken over her mind, was urging her to stay, to give in to the dark presence that was now part of her. It wanted her to stop questioning, to accept the inevitability of her fate. But that small, stubborn part of her refused. She wasn't like them. She wasn't like the others who had been consumed before her. She wouldn't. Evelyn gritted her teeth and staggered toward the door, her legs weak and trembling, her body aching as though it had been through a war. She reached out, her fingers brushing against the cold, rough wood. The house groaned, a deep, low sound that seemed to reverberate through the very walls, as if it were aware of her movements. The shadows gathered around her, thickening, swirling like a living entity, watching her every step. The tapping had stopped. The silence was deafening, but Evelyn could still feel it, the oppressive weight of the house, pressing in on her, urging her to turn back, to stop. "It's too late," the voice whispered again, the words crawling inside her skin, settling in her chest. "You are already part of me." She gritted her teeth, refusing to let the voice drown her in fear. She was not part of it. Not yet. She turned the doorknob, her fingers slipping with sweat, and pushed against the door. It creaked open, the sound so loud it echoed through the house, rattling the very foundation beneath her feet. Inside, the room was dark, almost impossibly dark. The flashlight flickered in her hand, but it didn't help. The darkness seemed to swallow it whole. Her pulse quickened, and she stepped into the room, heart pounding. It smelled wrong, damp, musty, like something had been rotting in the walls for years. The air was thick, saturated with a heaviness that made it almost impossible to breathe. And then she saw, at the far end of the room, tucked away in the corner, was an old mirror. It was covered in dust and grime, but the surface still glinted faintly in the darkness. And as she stepped closer, she realized something. The reflection wasn't her. The figure that stared back at her from the mirror was twisted, distorted, a grotesque mockery of her own face. Her eyes, her empty, hollow eyes, stared back at her with a cruel, knowing expression. Her lips pulled back in a grin that was far too wide, too unsettling, too wrong. For a moment, Evelyn couldn't move. Her mind screamed at her to turn away, to run. But her body was frozen, paralyzed by the sight of the reflection. The figure in the mirror. It was her, but it wasn't. It was something else. Something darker. The figure in the mirror moved. At first it was just a subtle shift, a twitch of its fingers, the slightest tilt of its head. But then it began to mirror her movements, in a way that wasn't quite right. It copied her, yes, but it was slower, more deliberate, as though it was savoring the motion. Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry. She took a step back, but the figure in the mirror didn't move. Instead, it stayed there, staring at her with those hollow, empty eyes, waiting. And then, in a voice that seemed to come from deep inside the mirror, it spoke. "You've made it this far, but now, you're mine." The words pierced her like a blade, and she staggered back, her heart pounding in her chest. The house, this house, was inside her. It was taking root, like a parasite, feeding on her fear, her confusion. The reflection. That thing wasn't just a twisted image of her. It was the house's voice, its essence, its hunger. Evelyn stumbled backward, her hands shaking. She could feel the darkness closing in, wrapping around her, pulling her back toward the door. The whispering grew louder again, more frantic. The tapping resumed, faster now, echoing off the walls, bouncing off the ceiling, vibrating through her bones. "You belong to me," the voice hissed. "You can never escape." Her vision blurred as she looked around the room. The walls were alive now, moving, pulsating with something dark, something ancient. The symbols from the journal, the same ones she had seen in the basement, were etched into the walls of the room, glowing faintly, their presence suffocating her. Evelyn's hands flew to her head as the pressure inside her skull intensified. It was like something was pushing against her mind, bending it, distorting it, twisting her thoughts into something unrecognizable. The laughter came again, her own laughter. But it wasn't hers anymore. It was the house's. The house that had been waiting for her to cross the threshold, waiting for her to accept its invitation, waiting for her to become part of it. She backed toward the door, hands trembling, her body shaking with the effort to remain in control. But the house wasn't letting go. It never would. She reached for the handle, twisting it, but the door wouldn't open. The house had locked her in. Her own reflection, no. The thing in the mirror began to laugh, the sound growing louder, more sinister. It wasn't her anymore. It was the house, mocking her. "Welcome home, Evelyn." And with that final chilling whisper, the door slammed shut, the darkness swallowing her whole. Evelyn's heart thudded painfully in her chest as she slammed her palm against the door. The cold wood resisted her touch, as if the house itself was holding her prisoner. The room had grown even darker, the shadows now thicker, darker, and more insistent. She could no longer tell where the walls ended, and the darkness began. Everything blended together into an oppressive, suffocating mass. The laughter from the mirror still echoed in her ears, an unholy sound that sent icy tendrils of fear crawling up her spine. The figure, her distorted reflection, remained in the glass, its eyes now locked onto her with a malevolent gleam. It was as though the thing in the mirror knew exactly what she was thinking, what she was feeling. It was her, and yet it was. Her pulse quickened as the tapping began again, this time louder, faster, almost frantic. The sound reverberated off the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. It came from somewhere deeper, somewhere farther within the house. The deeper she listened, the more it seemed like the tapping was calling her, beckoning her forward. Her mind raced, the confusion thickening with every passing moment. The house was a labyrinth now, the walls shifting and twisting, as though the very space around her was alive and aware. Evelyn's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She needed to escape. She had to get out. But the more she tried to focus on the door on the way out, the more the darkness seemed to pull her in, consuming her thoughts, drowning out everything else. She grabbed the doorknob again, twisting it with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. No matter how hard she pulled or pushed, the door wouldn't open. And then the voice came again. "You cannot leave." It was the voice from the mirror, the voice of the house. The same cold, hollow tone that seemed to crawl inside her mind and take root in her thoughts. It wasn't just speaking to her now. It was inside her like an invasive force that had burrowed deep under her skin, twisting and contorting her sense of reality. Evelyn's knees gave way, and she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with a mix of terror and exhaustion. The tapping grew louder, as though something or someone was moving closer, growing nearer with every breath she took. She pressed her hands to her temples, desperate to block out the noise, but it only grew louder, more insistent. "You're too weak to fight it," the voice whispered in her ear now, so close it felt like it was coming from inside her. The darkness around her seemed to stretch and swirl, thickening into a dense, suffocating fog. She couldn't see, couldn't think. All that existed was the voice, the tapping and the relentless pressure of the house, bearing down on her. And then, through the chaos, she heard it, a soft whisper, almost imperceptible. But it was there. "Help me." Evelyn froze. The words, so faint, so fragile, sent a shiver down her spine. She had heard that voice before. She had heard it in the silence of the house, in the quiet moments when she had convinced herself she was alone. It was faint, desperate, and it sounded like someone begging for help. Evelyn looked up, her vision blurry with tears. And there, in the far corner of the room, she saw something. A figure hunched over, its body twisted and broken, like it had been waiting there for an eternity. For a moment she couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. The figure was human, but not quite. Its skin was stretched too thin, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles, its face distorted in a grotesque parody of a human expression. It was as though the house had claimed it long ago, molding it into something unrecognizable. And yet, there was a flicker of something in its eyes, a glimmer of humanity. "Help me." The figure repeated the words, its voice raspy, almost choked with pain. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed herself to her feet, unsure whether the figure was real or just another trick of the house. She stumbled toward it, every step a struggle, her legs shaking beneath her. As she neared, the figure lifted its head slightly, its hollow eyes staring into hers. And then, just as she reached out to touch it, the figure let out a terrible, gurgling scream, its mouth opening impossibly wide, as though it were trying to consume her in one breath. Evelyn recoiled, her pulse racing, her body instinctively pulling away from the grotesque sight. But the figure's hands shot out, grabbing her by the wrist, its fingers cold and clammy against her skin. The house seemed to shake around her, the walls groaning and creaking as if the very structure were alive, thrashing against the weight of whatever was happening inside. The tapping was louder now, frantic, almost deafening, filling her ears with a maddening rhythm. "It's too late for you," the voice of the house whispered again, its cold breath against her ear. "It's too late for us all." Evelyn tried to pull away, but the figure's grip tightened, its twisted face now inches from her. She could see the emptiness in its eyes, an empty, hollow space that seemed to stretch on forever. And then it smiled, a terrible, wide grin that split its face in two, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. For a brief moment, Evelyn thought she saw something in the figure's eyes, a memory, something familiar, a fleeting moment of recognition. And then it was gone, replaced by the darkness. The figure opened its mouth again, this time to scream, but the scream was not its own. It was a scream of pure agony, of something beyond suffering, beyond pain. The walls of the house trembled as the sound of the scream filled the air, reverberating through every corner of the room. The ground beneath Evelyn's feet cracked, splitting open in a jagged line, as though the very foundation of the house was being torn apart. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, and the tapping was now joined by a deep, rumbling growl, like something ancient and malevolent was waking from its slumber. Evelyn stumbled back, her hands still caught in the figure's grip, her mind reeling. The house was no longer just a house. It was something more, something older, something that had been waiting for her to come here. And now there was no escape. Evelyn's heart pounded wildly in her chest as the house seemed to breathe around her, its groans and rattles shaking the very air she breathed. The figure's grip on her wrist was unyielding, cold and clammy, like a corpse that had been lying in the earth for centuries. The darkness in the room was no longer just an absence of light. It was a living thing, a hungry thing, swirling around her, pulling at her mind, suffocating her with its pressure. The figure's grotesque, twisted face loomed close, its wide grin widening even further as it stared at her with hollow, dead eyes. It was as though it was savoring her terror, feeding off her fear. The walls groaned again, and the house seemed to shift beneath her feet, a subtle, almost imperceptible lurch in the foundation, as if it were settling deeper into the earth. The tapping continued, relentless and maddening. But now there was something more. Beneath the taps, a low growl echoed through the floorboards, reverberating in her chest. The house was alive. No, it was more than alive. It was aware of her. It had always been aware of her. And now it was hungry. Evelyn's body froze as the figure leaned in closer, its twisted, contorted face just inches from hers. She could feel its breath, a cold, fetid gust of air, hitting her skin. The scream that it had let out before was still echoing in her mind, that terrible gurgling wail that had made her blood run cold. The figure opened its mouth again, but this time there was no scream. It was a whisper, a choking whisper that came from deep within the thing's throat. "You're part of it now." The words slithered through her mind like oily tendrils, sinking into her thoughts, poisoning them. She tried to jerk her hand free, but the figure's grip tightened, its fingers like iron around her wrist. The tapping grew louder, faster now, a frantic, chaotic sound that seemed to echo from all corners of the house. Evelyn could feel her pulse in her ears, drowning out everything else. As the figure's whisper grew more insistent, it was as if the house itself was feeding her these words, teaching her the truth she had refused to believe, the truth she had fought against, even as it had slowly consumed her. "The house will never let you go." The growl beneath the tapping grew louder, like a rumble of thunder shaking the earth. The floor beneath Evelyn's feet cracked again, and this time, the cracks didn't stop. They spread, snaking across the room like dark veins, as though the house was alive, its very foundations splitting open, revealing what lay beneath. Evelyn tried to scream, but her voice wouldn't come. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't think. The room was spinning around her, the shadows closing in, thickening like a storm cloud. The tapping, the growling, the whispers, they were all merging together, becoming one indistinguishable sound, a cacophony of noise that rattled her bones. "You're one of us now, Evelyn." The voice was louder, more forceful now. Like a command, it came from everywhere, from within the walls, the floor, the very air around her. The shadows pressed in on her from every direction, wrapping around her, tightening, squeezing until she could feel her ribs aching with the pressure. The figure's twisted, disfigured face remained fixed on hers, its grin widening even further. She could feel the cold dampness of its skin against hers, the touch of death. The thing's eyes, the empty, hollow sockets, seemed to reach into her soul, dragging her deeper into the abyss. She wanted to fight. She needed to fight, but something inside her, the house, maybe, was making it impossible. Her body felt heavy, as though the very air had grown thick with something malignant, something hungry. The growl beneath the tapping turned into a loud, low rumble, like the growl of a creature waking from a long slumber. Evelyn looked down, her eyes wide with terror, as the floor beneath her cracked open further, revealing something she could barely comprehend. A deep, pitch-black void, its edges shifting and writhing like a wound that would never heal. The figure in front of her began to move again, its limbs bending at unnatural angles, crawling toward her with an unnatural grace. Its eyes, those hollow, dark eyes, never left hers. And then, Evelyn realized, as if it were some horrifying revelation, that the figure wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an unknown entity from the house. No, it was her, the real her, the one that had already been consumed, already trapped inside the house. "We've always been here." The voice seemed to echo in every corner of the room. It was no longer just a whisper. It was everywhere, inside her head, inside her soul. The truth was inescapable now. The house had claimed her slowly, methodically, over time. It had been waiting for her, watching her, pulling her closer to the moment when she would finally understand. "We're part of it now." Her breath came in ragged gasps, as she struggled to pull her hand free from the figure's grasp. But it was no use. The darkness in the room had grown so thick, so consuming, that she could barely see, barely think. The figure's face began to shift again, as if it were changing, mutating, becoming something else, something worse. And then, suddenly, there was a noise, a crash, a violent thud that reverberated through the room, shaking the walls. The figure's eyes shifted toward the sound, and for a brief moment it released its grip on her wrist. Evelyn didn't wait. She didn't think. She scrambled toward the door, her body fueled by pure instinct, desperation fueling her every movement. She pushed against the door with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The growl from below deepened. Something was stirring under the floorboards, something ancient and hungry, something that had been waiting to awaken. Evelyn's breath came in short, sharp gasps, her hands trembling as she pulled desperately at the door. It was not going to keep her here. She wouldn't let it. Evelyn. The voice, her own voice, came from behind her, soft, comforting, and yet cold, too cold to be real. She turned slowly, fear crawling down her spine. The figure was no longer standing. Instead, it was kneeling on the floor, its head cocked to the side as it smiled at her. The same twisted grin that had never left her mind. It opened its mouth and whispered, "Welcome home." Evelyn's heart was racing as she staggered backward, her chest heaving with desperation. The room around her blurred into a chaotic mix of shadows and faint light. The growl beneath the floorboards intensified, like the low rumble of something immense, a force waking from a deep slumber. It vibrated through her bones, the sound inescapable, impossible to ignore. The house was alive, alive and watching her, breathing with every step she took. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the doorknob again. This time, it twisted freely in her grip. The door creaked open just enough for her to see into the hallway beyond, dark and silent, stretching into the unknown. A sliver of hope shot through her veins, but it was fleeting, like a candle flame flickering in a storm. The tapping had stopped. The growl was quieter now, but the shadows were thicker, as if something had moved deeper into the heart of the house. Waiting, Evelyn pushed the door open wider, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. She had to get out. The air in the room was thick and oppressive, heavier than before, and her legs felt like they were made of lead. Every inch she moved forward felt like wading through molasses, the house pressing in on her from all sides. As she took a hesitant step into the hallway, her skin prickled with the sensation of eyes watching her, following her every movement. The familiar oppressive weight of the house was back, its presence suffocating her, making the air feel colder, denser. And yet there was something else now, something worse, something more invasive. The house was no longer just an old building. It was a living, breathing entity that had marked her. Her legs buckled beneath her as she reached the top of the stairs, barely able to catch herself on the railing. The darkness below stretched into infinity. There was no sign of anything familiar anymore. No warmth, no comfort. Only the suffocating blackness, the endless void that seemed to swallow everything. And then the whispering began again. "You can't escape." The voice came from within the house, from the walls, the floors, and the ceiling. It was everywhere, pressing in on her, filling her head, drowning her in its cold, relentless insistence. Evelyn's heart raced. She had to keep moving. She couldn't stop now. The door at the bottom of the stairs was still open, a promise of freedom, even if it felt as though that promise had been warped by the house itself. She gritted her teeth and forced herself down, step by agonizing step. Each one seemed heavier than the last, as though the house was pushing against her, trying to drag her back, to force her to stay. The shadows at the edges of her vision flickered, twisting in the periphery, but every time she looked, they were gone. Something was moving in the darkness, watching her, waiting. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she hesitated, her hand resting against the doorframe, her breath caught in her throat. The tapping had returned, slower now, but still there, like the sound of a distant heart. She dared to step into the foyer, the very air seeming to hum with an unnatural energy. The smell of decay, damp earth and rot clung to everything, thickening the air around her. But there was something else too, a faint scent of something familiar, something she couldn't place, but it was there, pulling at the corners of her mind, a scent she had known for years, something she could almost taste. Evelyn's eyes darted across the room, scanning the space, looking for any sign of life, any sign of movement. The shadows shifted, sliding across the walls like liquid, but no matter where she looked, there was nothing but the quiet, creeping menace of the house. The front door was in sight. She could make it. She could run. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the sound of shuffling feet reached her, the faintest scrape of something against the floorboards. Her body froze. There was someone in the house with her. She turned slowly, her eyes widening in terror, as she caught sight of the figure in the corner of the room, the one that had been following her since the very beginning. It was her, not the figure in the mirror this time, but the real her, her face, but twisted beyond recognition. The skin was stretched taut over her bones, eyes wide and unblinking, mouth pulled back into a cruel, unnatural smile. Its movements were slow, jerky, like something that hadn't moved in far too long. Its feet dragged across the floor, scraping along the wooden planks, leaving behind an eerie dragging sound that seemed to echo through the hall. The creature, the thing that had once been Evelyn, moved toward her with deliberate slowness. The space around them felt like it was warping, bending. The shadows deepened, their edges jagged like broken glass. The air grew colder, heavier, suffocating. Evelyn's breath came faster, her chest heaving, but she couldn't look away. She couldn't tear her gaze from the thing that was once her. It raised a hand, trembling, brittle, and pointed at her with a finger that seemed too long, too thin. The finger moved slowly, deliberately, as it traced a line from Evelyn's chest to her throat. The touch was cold, colder than anything she had felt before. It was like ice, like death itself was seeping into her veins, reaching for her heart. "We're the same." The voice, it was her voice. But not, it was hollow, empty, tainted with the echo of the house itself. And it twisted the words. Evelyn opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The house had stolen her voice, just as it had stolen her sanity, her identity. She was no longer herself. She was part of it, part of the house. She could feel it now, a strange kind of pull deep within her, an insidious gnawing hunger that demanded she belong. She could feel it in her bones, in the very marrow of her being, like a sickness that had slowly consumed her from within. "You are us now," the words echoed in her head, the voice no longer her own, no longer even human. The figure, it was her, but it wasn't. Took a step closer, its grin widening, its eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, burned into her. And in that moment, Evelyn realized the truth. She was never going to leave. The house had already claimed her, and now she was part of it. The silence that followed the thing's pronouncement was suffocating. "You are us now." Evelyn stood frozen, her hands clenched into trembling fists at her sides, knuckles white. The air in the foyer was dense, as though she stood submerged in black water, suspended and breathless, her body no longer entirely her own. Each breath she took felt stolen, as if the house was allowing it, not because she was alive, but because it hadn't yet finished with her. The creature before her, the distorted version of herself, tilted its head with a mechanical slowness, observing her with unreadable eyes. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Its presence saturated the space like mold creeping up old wallpaper. Evelyn couldn't look away, even as the figure's skin began to crack, thin seams appearing along its face and arms, like something was inside trying to break free. She backed away instinctively, bumping into the corner of the hallway wall. Her fingers brushed against the rough plaster, and it felt soft, too soft. She yanked her hand back and turned to look where the wall should have been, solid and cool. It now pulsed warm and moist beneath peeling layers of paper, like flesh. The realization sickened her. The house wasn't just aware. It was alive in a way beyond comprehension, parasitic, maybe even sentient. And it had learned her, molded itself around her memories, her regrets, her pain. It had carved her loneliness into its beams, stitched her sadness into its floorboards. She had unknowingly fed it with every sleepless night, every desperate breath. And now it was done feeding. Now it wanted her whole. The other Evelyn took a step forward, and the cracking sounds intensified. Its smile widened beyond natural limits, splitting the skin along its cheeks, revealing glistening muscle and empty black beneath. But there was no blood. The thing didn't bleed. It simply opened wider and wider, like it was unhinging its jaw not to speak, but to swallow. A soft sound, so quiet she almost missed it, pulled her gaze toward the staircase again. A child's laugh. Evelyn froze. It was faint, echoing, as though it had come from upstairs, somewhere deep within the old walls. It was a laugh she didn't recognize, but something about it made her heart twist in her chest. Not in fear this time, but in sorrow. The other Evelyn's head snapped toward the ceiling at the sound, and for a moment its body stilled, as though even it hadn't expected to hear it. The house reacted too. A long groan ran through the foundation, vibrating the floor beneath her feet, and the shadows rippled along the walls like disturbed water. Evelyn seized the moment. She turned and ran, not for the front door but toward the hallway branching to the right. She didn't know why, didn't have a plan. Her feet simply carried her in the direction of that laugh. Something inside her, something instinctual and buried deep, urged her forward. Maybe it was madness. Maybe the house had already corrupted her so thoroughly that she believed it was guiding her towards salvation when in truth it was simply playing with its prey. But still she ran. The hallway was impossibly long now. It hadn't been like this when she first moved in. The walls narrowed the further she went, pressing in as though trying to stop her. She brushed past doors that didn't exist before. Each one closed, the handles warm like skin. Behind them she could hear things breathing, waiting. The laughter echoed again, closer this time. It was strange, playful, almost joyful, but the way it echoed, fractured and distant, made it sound warped, like a recording played on a loop for too long. Still, it led her through the narrowing hallway, past a set of crooked stairs leading into the attic she didn't remember ever having. She paused at the base of the attic stairs, looking up into a pitch-black void that seemed to breathe. The temperature dropped. Her breath puffed out in small white clouds. She could feel the house pulsing behind her, urging her to turn around, to return to the other Evelyn, to become whole again. But that laugh, it was up there. With trembling hands, she climbed the steps. Each board groaned under her weight, like a cry of protest. Halfway up she felt something brush against her ankle, cold, slick, finger-like. But when she kicked, there was nothing there. She reached the attic door. It opened before she touched it. Inside, the attic was not an attic at all. It was a room, large and empty, lined with mirrors, dozens of them. No dust, no cobwebs, just pristine glass from floor to ceiling, arranged like a maze. And in the center of it all was a child. Evelyn stepped inside, the door closing silently behind her. The child stood barefoot in a nightgown, pale and small, her hair falling in long black strands over her face. She was humming to herself, rocking side to side. Evelyn's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice thin. The child stopped, her head tilted. "You were sad," the girl said softly, her voice echoing strangely. "So the house made you feel better." Evelyn took a step forward, heart pounding. "Feel better? This place it's a nightmare." The girl looked up, her eyes were empty sockets. Nightmares are just truths with their masks off. The mirrors flickered. Evelyn turned, and where there had been only her reflection before, there were now dozens of her. Each mirror showed a different version of her, laughing, screaming, crying, decay. One was silently pleading, hand pressed to the glass, mouth moving with no sound. Another was completely still, watching her with lifeless eyes. Each reflection seemed more detached from reality, more wrong. She spun in place, surrounded. There was no exit. The child disappeared from the center of the room, flickering out of sight like a broken light bulb. And the laughter returned, higher now, more shrill, bouncing off every wall, every surface, surrounding Evelyn, until it became unbearable. The mirrors began to crack. Hairline fractures snaked across the glass, with sharp, high-pitched whines. She backed away, heart racing, until her heel hit something behind her. It was a cradle, old, wooden, dusty, and inside it was nothing but a pile of moldy, blood-stained blankets. She stared at it in confusion, dread crawling up her spine like a cold hand. Then she heard her own voice whisper behind her ear. "You left me here." She spun around. No one was there. The mirrors shattered. The explosion of glass was deafening. Shards flew in all directions, twinkling in the dim light like malevolent stars. Evelyn dropped to the floor, arms shielding her face as pieces of mirror rained down, slicing the air with whispering precision. When the silence finally returned, it was absolute, a graveyard stillness. She rose, slowly, hands shaking, her breath ragged and shallow. The mirrors were gone, all of them. In their place were gaping, black voids, doorways that hadn't been there before. Some pulsed faintly, like slow heartbeats. Others remained completely still, empty and consuming. Each opening led into another space, impossible to understand. Corridors, rooms, vast fields of darkness. and each reflected a different part of her. From the corner of her eye, Evelyn glimpsed one doorway that looked like her childhood bedroom, pink walls, faded teddy bear wallpaper, a crooked bookshelf sagging under the weight of old storybooks. Another showed a dimly lit hospital room, machines beeping rhythmically. She felt the sting of salt in her throat just seeing it. She didn't know why. Her legs ached as she moved closer to the nearest portal, the one that resembled a hallway from her old high school. The linoleum glistened under flickering overhead lights, and lockers lined the wall, each one slightly ajar, whispering. A sound broke the silence, crying, faint, almost imperceptible. It came from the cradle. Evelyn turned back to it with hesitation. The pile of blankets was moving. Her breath caught in her throat as the topmost cloth slipped away, slowly. Like something stirring beneath it, she stepped closer, drawn by some strange, horrible magnetism. From within the folds emerged a small hand, tiny, gray, fingers curled like a newborn. But it was wrong. The skin cracked like old porcelain, and where the fingernails should have been, there were only tiny black pits. The crying intensified, sharp and high-pitched. Evelyn couldn't look away. The child, or thing in the cradle, began to push itself upright, the blanket sliding away to reveal the curve of a head. Wispy hair stuck to its damp skull, and its body twitched unnaturally, like a puppet on tangled strings. And then the crying stopped. It looked at her. Its eyes were featureless voids, dark as ink, deep as space. Yet Evelyn felt them pierce through her like spears. The thing tilted its head, just like the mirror version of herself had done. A strange smile cracked across its tiny face. "You forgot," it whispered. Evelyn took a shaky step back. Forgot what? The thing only stared. A memory surfaced like a corpse rising from the depths. Her sitting in the passenger seat of a car, one hand protectively on her stomach, rain hammering the windshield. Her then husband's voice rising with frustration, but blurred by the noise in her head. Pain, fear, a flash of red. The hospital, silence. "No," Evelyn whispered, her hand covering her mouth. She hadn't thought about that in years, had forced herself not to. She'd buried it beneath work, beneath her marriage, beneath the house she now stood in. "You left me," the creature said again, louder now. It climbed from the cradle, moving with jerky inhuman motions. "You left us all." "Stop!" Evelyn backed into one of the mirror doors, but the hallway behind it was gone now. Just swirling black. "I didn't know," she croaked, tears springing to her eyes. "I didn't," but the child was gone. The room changed around her again. The attic twisted, walls stretching like wax, beams warping as though melted under invisible heat. A terrible groan rose from the floor, the sound of old wood splitting under pressure. And then came the scratching, hundreds of small claws scraping the walls, crawling behind them. The mirrors had become windows. Behind each one now stood a figure. Some were versions of herself, laughing, shrieking, begging. But others weren't. They were strange. The mirrors, no windows, flickered like malfunctioning monitors, each one a snapshot of horror frozen in time. Behind some, Evelyn could see rooms that mirrored parts of her life. A kitchen she once shared with her mother, a high school gym locker room, the sterile hallway of a psychiatric ward. But what chilled her were the figures watching her from within those frames. Some looked like her, but twisted, aged versions, bloodied, eyeless, or slack-jawed in silent screams. Others were not her at all. Faceless children clutching toys made of hair and bone. A woman with no hands scratching at the glass with her teeth. A shadow with her ex-husband's voice, laughing and laughing and laughing. Each one stared without blinking, silently pressing closer to the surface, as if waiting for permission to come through. Evelyn staggered backward, heart hammering, the air thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic like rusted iron or old blood. Her limbs felt heavier with every step, as though the house had begun absorbing her weight, trying to root her in place. She turned back to the center of the room, searching for the cradle, but it was gone. Vanished, along with the creature that had claimed to be her forgotten child. The child she had never held. The child she had never named. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, one hand gripping her hair. the other clutching at her chest. Her thoughts spiraled, each one hitting harder than the last. You chose to forget. You buried the pain. Now the house remembers. The laughter returned. High, warped, gleeful. It echoed above her, then behind her. Then inside her. She clamped her hands over her ears. But the sound pressed inward, vibrating in her jaw, her spine, her teeth. She tried to scream, but her throat clenched shut as though the house itself had taken control. The walls began to breathe again, slow in and out. Wood and plaster flexed and shuddered, expanding with a wet, organic sound. Her own reflection flickered on every surface, disjointed and multiplying. One smiled, one cried, one raised a hand and reached through the glass, its fingers breaking the surface as though it were water. Evelyn scrambled away. She had to find the exit. Her mind, though fraying, clung to that one truth. She wasn't supposed to be here. The house wanted her, needed her. But it hadn't won yet. She hadn't fully given herself over. Not while she still remembered who she was. She bolted for one of the windows, now showing what looked like the living room. The version from when she first moved in. Bright morning light filtered through clean curtains. A mug of untouched coffee sat beside a worn novel. It was peaceful, ordinary, false. A voice inside warned. But she didn't care. She threw herself into the glass. There was no shatter, no resistance, just a cold, wet feeling, like falling through a heavy fog, and then she hit the floor, hard. The room was still. She was lying on the old living room rug. The air smelled of lavender and wood polish. The mug was there, warm to the touch. The book still open to page 17. Everything exactly as it had been. Had she imagined it? Was she waking from a dream within a nightmare? She sat up slowly. The pain in her ribs felt real enough. Her head throbbed and her palms were scraped raw, but she was here, alive, alone. The clock ticked. Distant cars passed by outside. For the first time in hours, or had it been days, there was silence. She stayed there unmoving for nearly 10 minutes, watching the dust dance in a beam of sunlight from the window. Nothing shifted, nothing breathed behind the walls. But then she saw it. A handprint, not her, on the inside of the television screen, smeared faintly, like condensation on glass, and just beyond it, behind the static glow, eyes, watching, blinking. Evelyn stood up too fast, her vision swimming. She backed away, one hand reaching for the fireplace poker. The television snapped on by itself, no sound, just an image. Her sitting exactly as she had been moments ago, staring out the window. The same beam of sunlight, the same angle, except the version of her on the screen turned slowly toward the camera and smiled. A knock came from the basement door, soft, rhythmic, 3 taps. She didn't remember leaving that door unlocked. In fact, she had never even gone into the basement since moving in. Something about it had always felt wrong. Cold drafts seeped through its threshold and the door was slightly swollen with moisture, as though the house wanted to keep whatever was behind it contained. The knocking came again, then a voice. It was hers, Evelyn. It sang softly, "Come down, come see." Her pulse surged. She turned to the front door, only a few feet away. Go, run. But her feet refused to move. Not because of fear, because something else was pulling at her, an invisible thread wrapped around her spine, tightening with every beat of her heart. Her eyes dropped to her shadow. It wasn't moving with her. It lagged half a second behind, then began stretching, elongating like oil spreading across a tile floor. The shadow opened its mouth and screamed, a scream Evelyn couldn't hear, but could feel, a vibration in her teeth, in her bones, in the wet corners of her eyes. She covered her ears and squeezed her eyes shut. Stop, stop, stop. Everything halted. When she opened her eyes, the house was dark again, the windows covered, the lights off. The only illumination came from the basement doorway, now cracked open. The light was faint, orange like a dying candle. The voice called again. This time, it sounded like her mother. "Evelyn, don't keep me waiting." Her throat tightened, because her mother had died 6 years ago, and she had never been in this house. Evelyn's legs trembled beneath her as she stood facing the basement door. its orange glow bleeding into the surrounding darkness, like the last light in a collapsing world. Her mother's voice echoed again, soft, insistent, familiar. But it didn't belong here. This house didn't know her mother. This house only knew Evelyn. And that was the point. It wasn't her mother. It was something that wore her voice like skin. Still, a part of her wanted to believe, wanted to run down the stairs and find a warm embrace, an explanation, a rescue from the slow nightmare that had consumed every wall, every room, every reflection. She took one hesitant step forward, then another. The floorboards no longer creaked. That was worse. At the top of the basement stairs she paused. The light from below pulsed softly, as if in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The air smelled of earth and rot, and something sweet that soured the longer she breathed it in, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. "Come down, Evie," the voice cooed again. "I'm waiting." It had been years since anyone had called her that. And now, standing at the edge of the abyss, she remembered something she hadn't thought about in decades: her mother's lullaby. A little song she used to sing on nights Evelyn was afraid of the dark. But now it was being sung back to her from below. Evelyn descended the stairs. Each step was soft beneath her feet, like the wood had turned to sponge. The walls were damp. The paint bubbled and peeling in strips. Shadows clung to the corners like spider webs spun from smoke. She reached the bottom. The basement was deeper than it should have been. It stretched far beyond the boundaries of the house, a cavernous expanse with no walls, no ceiling, just a floor that continued out into black nothingness. The orange glow came from a lantern, hanging from a bent nail hammered into a beam. Beneath it, in the flickering circle of light, was a chair, and in the chair sat a figure. Not her mother, but close. The woman looked up slowly. Her features were almost right. The same shape of the jaw, the same dark curls, the same soft eyes. But there was something glassy, puppet-like about her, like she'd been sculpted from memory by something that had never truly seen a human face. "Evie," the woman smiled. "You came." Evelyn didn't speak. Her hands hung limp at her sides. The figure tilted her head, just slightly. "I know it's confusing. The house. It helps you remember. Helps you see. That's what it's for." "What are you?" Evelyn whispered. "Reflection," the woman replied. "Of you. Of them." She gestured to the darkness behind her. Figures stepped forward. Some wore her face. Some didn't. Some were twisted in grief, or horror, or rage. Others smiled, benign and patient, their eyes glistening like stones in deep water. Dozens of them forming a half-circle around the lantern's glow. "They're all here because of you, Evelyn. No, you brought your grief here, your guilt, the things you couldn't face." Her smile never faltered. "So we became them. You fed us." "I didn't mean to," Evelyn said, her voice cracking. I needed quiet. I needed somewhere to think." The figure nodded. "And you thought this place was abandoned, forgotten, but it never was." The other reflections began whispering, a low, rustling sound, like leaves scraping pavement. "We remember what you forget. We remember you." Behind her, Evelyn heard movement on the stairs. She turned. Another version of herself was descending. The same clothes, the same face, but with darker eyes and a calm expression. Her twin in every way, except her smile was too still, "You don't belong up there anymore," it said. "You belong here." Evelyn backed away. The reflections moved closer, forming a tight ring. "You keep trying to leave," her double said, stepping off the last stair. "But the house isn't a place. It's a mirror." "I'm not you," Evelyn spat, voice rising. "I'm me, the real one." "But that's the problem," the woman in the chair whispered. "You don't know who that is anymore, do you?" A silence fell across the basement. Evelyn's breath was ragged, her eyes stinging with tears. She shook her head. "You want me to surrender, to become part of this?" "No," her double said. "You already are." And that's when Evelyn saw it. Her hands. They weren't hers anymore. They were gray, cracked, small, like the child's. She looked down at her arms, too short, her legs, her chest. She had become the child from the cradle. "No, no," she backed away. but the faces closed in. The darkness folded over itself. The lantern flickered, dimmed. She was being pulled into the floor, into the wood, into the house. Voices sang around her, rising like a choir of the drowned. "Come home, Evelyn. Rest. Be still," she screamed, her voice torn from her lungs. But there was no echo now, just a dense, velvet silence that swallowed sound. Then a single knock. From above, the light returned. Evelyn gasped, lying on the cold floor of the living room again, drenched in sweat. The television was off. The room was quiet. The basement door sealed. Her hands, her own. She sat up, heart pounding. Was it over? No, the silence was too perfect. On the coffee table, her mug of coffee sat exactly as before, steam curling gently from the rim, and inside it, reflected on the surface, her face, but not the one she knew. The other her smiled, from the inside of the mug. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she reached toward the coffee mug on the table. Her reflection in the surface was distorted, a slight ripple moving across the surface as her hand hovered just above it. The smile that stared back at her, no, inched back at her, was wrong. It was too wide, too sharp. Her lips stretched impossibly, revealing teeth that weren't hers, a grin that felt unnatural, mocking. Her breath hitched in her throat. This can't be happening. Her fingers clenched into a fist, and she slammed it onto the table, knocking the mug over. The hot liquid spilled, soaking the coaster beneath it, splashing across the surface of the table like ink spreading across paper. The reflection in the coffee rippled once, and then everything stopped. Dead silence. For a long moment, nothing moved. Not even the air. Then a soft creak sounded from behind her, and Evelyn's pulse shot through her chest. Slowly, cautiously, she turned her head. The front door was open. A cold breeze swept into the room, making the curtains flutter gently. The street outside was bathed in the pale light of an early evening moon. Nothing looked out of place. Nothing had changed, except for the feeling. The house was watching her. Her heart raced again. The familiar anxiety gnawed at her gut. She had to leave. She had to get out. But the door, it was an invitation, wasn't it? The house had opened it for her. It wanted her to go out there, to leave, to walk away from the mirrors, the reflections, the suffocating grasp of this place. But she couldn't trust it. Not anymore. Evelyn stood up shakily, pushing the chair back. The floor beneath her feet seemed soft, almost yielding as she made her way toward the door. Her eyes flickered to the mirrors on the walls, every single one of them reflecting her image back, distorted and wrong. Some showed her as she was anxious, tired, broken, but others were more fragmented. Her face stretched unnaturally, her eyes widening to impossible sizes. Some reflections smirked, others stared back in mute horror. Her breathing was shallow as she took a step toward the door. Each movement felt heavy, like the house was trying to pull her back in, to trap her again. The door beckoned. It promised freedom. She stepped outside. Cold air hit her face immediately, and for a moment she could have sworn she heard something behind her, like a faint whisper carried on the wind, a voice calling her name. No, it was more than just a voice. It was a lure, a pull, an invisible thread tying her to the house she had just left behind. She didn't look back. Not yet. Her feet carried her down the front steps. The street was quiet, empty, peaceful, the kind of neighborhood you could walk through and feel safe. Nothing was out of place, except her. The house loomed behind her, dark and ominous. There was something about it, something that made it feel alive in a way that no home should. She could feel it in her chest, tightening, squeezing, as though it was holding its breath, waiting for her to turn around. She stopped at the end of the walkway, eyes fixed on the door she had just walked out of. A faint glow emanated from the upstairs window, the faint outline of a figure standing there. Not a real person, just an outline, like a reflection. No, she shook her head, trying to shake the images from her mind. She had to focus. She needed to get away, but the pull was there still, tugging at the back of her mind. The urge to look back, to return, to go back to the mirrors, to the other versions of her. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her as a wave of dizziness washed over her. She stumbled to the side of the house, the world blurring at the edges. In the distance, the sound of wind picked up, a howl, a screeching gust, that didn't sound natural. It rattled the windows, and she felt the pressure of it in her chest, in her throat. It was coming from inside the house. She had to leave. Her mind screamed at her to turn around, to run, but she couldn't. The street was empty. There was no one around, no one to call out to. And yet, she heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick, deliberate, closer. The sound wasn't coming from the house behind her. No, it was coming from the sidewalk in front of her. It was coming from the sidewalk in front of her. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. The footsteps grew louder, the rhythm distinct, as if someone or something was walking toward her. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Her mind was screaming, begging her to run, to get out of sight, to disappear. But she was frozen. She felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Her heart stopped. It was a touch so cold, so clammy. It sent a ripple through her entire body. Her spine stiffened, and she felt the presence before she even turned around. She didn't need to look. She didn't need to confirm it, but she did anyway. She turned. There, standing just behind her, was a reflection, a twisted, broken version of herself, with a smile stretched far too wide. "You should have stayed," it whispered. "We never let you leave." Evelyn tried to scream, but nothing came out. The darkness took her. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the house on Renfield Lane. If you've enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. What do you think happened to Evelyn? Was she truly free, or was the house always with her? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more unsettling tales like this one. Who knows what stories we'll uncover next?